Imagine an empire stretching across 3 continents, a power that held the heart of the world in its hands for over 6 centuries. This wasn't just a kingdom, it was a force of nature, a civilization that shaped the destiny of Europe, Asia, and Africa. At its zenith, the Ottoman Empire was the undisputed superpower of its time, its influence echoing in the halls of power from Venice to Persia. Much like the United States shapes global culture and politics today. Its armies were legendary, its navy controlled the seas, and its capital was the envy of the world. This is the story of a golden age, of a city that was the center of the universe, and of the sultans who dared to dream of world dominion. For centuries, all roads led not to Rome, but to Constantinople. Renamed Istanbul, this city wasn't just the capital of the Ottoman Empire, it was its soul, a vibrant jewel sitting at the crossroads of civilization, where east met west, and the ancient world merged with the new. Picture a place of breathtaking beauty, where the skyline was a forest of slender minarets and majestic domes, all bathed in the warm, golden light of the But. Down below, the Grand Bazaar, a city within a city, teemed with life. Merchants from every corner of the known world haggled over silks from China, spices from India, and gems from Africa. The air was thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts, strong coffee, and 1,000 different perfumes. Every street corner held a story. Every fountain whispered a secret. This was a city built on dreams, a testament to the power and sophistication of an empire at its peak. It was more than a capital. It was the vibrant, beating heart of the world. At the center of this world was the Topkapi Palace, a sprawling complex of courtyards, chambers, and gardens overlooking the sea. This was no mere residence. It was the nerve center of the empire, a place of immense power and intricate ritual. Here, the gears of a global empire turned. Within these walls, life moved to a rhythm of its own, dictated by centuries of tradition. Imagine the scene: high-ranking officials in elaborate robes striding through marble halls, their whispers deciding the fate of nations. Eunuchs guarded the sacred inner sanctum of the harem, a world of its own, shrouded in mystery and intrigue. Young pages, the empire's future leaders, trained rigorously in arts, sciences, and warfare. Every detail, from the patterns on the Iznik tiles to the way a cup of coffee was served, was steeped in meaning and protocol. The silence of the inner courtyards was broken only by the gentle splash of fountains and the distant call to prayer, a constant reminder of the spiritual foundation upon which this mighty empire was built. It was a life of unparalleled luxury, but also of immense pressure and responsibility, where every move was watched and every word carried weight. From this seat of power ruled the sultans, men who were not just kings, but shadows of God on earth. They were absolute monarchs, their will the law of the land. Figures like Mehmed the Conqueror, who at just 21 years old, achieved the impossible by conquering Constantinople, using cannons so massive they shook the very foundations of the medieval world. His ambition was boundless, his vision to create a new Roman Empire with himself at its head. Then came Suleiman, the Magnificent, the Lawgiver, a poet, a patron of the arts, and a brilliant military strategist. Under his reign, the empire reached its golden age. His armies marched to the gates of Vienna. His fleets, commanded by the formidable Barbarossa, dominated the Mediterranean. Suleiman wasn't just a conqueror, he was a builder. He commissioned the great architect Mimar Sinan to adorn Istanbul and the empire with mosques, bridges, and aqueducts that still stand today as monuments to his greatness. These sultans were complex figures, pious yet ruthless, cultured yet warlike. They carried the weight of the world on their shoulders, their decisions echoing from the deserts of Arabia to the plains of Hungary. Their lives were a tapestry of grand ambition, personal sacrifice, and the lonely burden of absolute power. Daily life for the Sultan was a carefully choreographed performance of power. The day would begin with morning prayers, followed by audiences in the Divan, the Imperial Council, where the Grand Vizier and other ministers would present the issues of the state. The Sultan, often listening from behind a lattice screen, held the power of life and death over all his subjects. He was the ultimate judge, the supreme commander of the army, and the protector of the faith. But beyond the statecraft, there was a personal side. He would spend time in the exquisite gardens of the palace, practice his skills in calligraphy or poetry, or inspect the work of the master jewelers and craftsmen in his employ. Feasts were legendary affairs, with dozens of courses served on precious porcelain and gold. Entertainment could range from philosophical debates with scholars to displays of horsemanship and archery in the palace grounds. Yet, even in moments of leisure, the Sultan was never truly alone. Always surrounded by his court, always the center of a universe he had inherited and was sworn to protect. It was a life of gilded isolation, where the man was often lost behind the myth of the sovereign. The splendor of the court was reflected in the lives of the people. While the Sultan ruled from his palace, the empire was a mosaic of cultures, religions, and languages, coexisting in a system known as the millet system. In the bustling streets of Istanbul, you would see Orthodox Greeks, Armenian Christians, and Sephardic Jews living and working alongside their Muslim neighbors. Each community governed its own internal affairs, from marriage to education, under the ultimate authority of the Sultan. This relative tolerance allowed for a vibrant exchange of ideas and traditions. Coffee houses became centers of social and intellectual life, where men from all walks of life would gather to discuss politics, recite the poetry, and play back. The guilds of artisans produced goods of incredible quality, from intricate carpets and ceramics to finely crafted weapons and scientific instruments. While life was certainly not easy for everyone, and the hand of the state was ever present, the golden age of the Ottoman Empire was a time of relative stability and prosperity for many of its subjects, a period where art, science, and commerce flourished under the shade of the Sultan's banner. As the sun sets over the Bosphorus, casting long shadows from the ancient minarets, we are reminded that all empires, no matter how great, are fleeting. The story of the Ottoman sultans and their dazzling court is more than just a chapter in a history book. It is a timeless human story of ambition, faith, power, and beauty. It teaches us about the rise and fall of civilizations, the complexities of governance, and the enduring power of culture. The echoes of this magnificent empire still resonate in the world today, in the architecture, the cuisine, the music, and the very soul of the lands it once ruled. Its legacy is a reminder that in the grand tapestry of history, every thread, no matter how brilliant, eventually comes to an end, leaving behind a story for future generations to marvel at. Thank you for joining us on this journey back in time. If you found yourself captivated by the grandeur of the Ottoman Empire, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories from the crossroads of history. We'll see you next time. In the heart of Istanbul, under the golden domes of the Topkapi Palace, the Ottoman Empire shone with a brilliance that dazzled the world. Its armies were legendary, its coffers overflowed with the wealth of 3 continents, and its sultan was hailed as the shadow of God on earth. For centuries, this was the empire of superlatives, the largest, the richest, the most powerful. But beneath the gleaming surface, in the quiet, candlelit corridors of power, a slow, invisible decay had begun to set in. It was unto rot you could see in the grandeur of the architecture or the splendor of the court. It was a weakness of the spirit, a fraying of the very threads that held the magnificent tapestry together. This is the story of how a mighty empire, seemingly at its zenith, began to crumble from within, long before the world ever noticed. The story of this decline isn't one of grand battles lost or territories conquered. It's a quieter, more insidious tale, whispered in the secluded chambers of the harem and plotted in the shadowy corners of the divan, the imperial council. The problems began, ironically, with a system designed to ensure strength: the succession. In the early days, the sons of the sultan would govern provinces, gaining experience, and upon their father's death, the most capable or ruthless would fight his way to the throne. It was a brutal survival of the fittest that ensured a strong leader. But this practice of royal fratricide, the killing of one's brothers to secure the throne, created a climate of fear and bloodshed that ultimately became unsustainable. So, a new system emerged. Princes were no longer sent to the provinces. Instead, they were confined to the palace in a gilded cage known as the caves. Here, they lived in luxurious seclusion, often for decades, with no experience in governance, military affairs, or the world outside the palace walls. They were surrounded by servants and companions, but their lives were shadowed by the constant threat of execution should the reigning sultan feel insecure. Imagine spending your entire life in a beautiful prison, knowing that your brother, the sultan, held the power of your life and death. When one of these princes finally ascended to the throne, Often late in life, they were unprepared, paranoid, and easily manipulated. They were no longer the warrior statesmen of old, but men broken by a lifetime of isolation and fear. This shift, from experienced rulers to secluded princes, was the first and perhaps most critical crack in the empire's foundation. This weakness at the very top created a power vacuum, and nature, especially political nature, abhors a vacuum. Into this void stepped the figures of the court, the Grand Vizier, the chief ministers, and most notably, the powerful women of the imperial harem. The era known as the Sultanate of Women began, where mothers and wives of the sultans wielded immense influence from behind the scenes. Women like Kaiksem Sultan and her predecessor Safi Sultan were not just consorts, they were de facto rulers, managing state affairs, appointing officials, and dictating policy through their sons or husbands. While many were incredibly shrewd and capable, their power was unofficial and relied on a complex web of alliances and intrigue. This led to a government run, not by clear policy, but by factionalism and personal loyalty. Who you knew in the harem became more important than your actual ability. Corruption began to seep into every level of the administration. Positions were no longer awarded based on merit, but were sold to the highest bidder. A man could buy the governorship of a province, then ruthlessly tax its people to recoup his investment and make a profit. Justice itself was for sale. This system, known as iltism, or tax farming, was like a cancer, eating away at the trust between the government and its people. While the palace in Istanbul remained a picture of opulence, the provinces began to suffer from neglect and exploitation. The loyalty of the empire's diverse peoples, once a source of strength, began to waver as they saw the state, not as a protector, but as a predator. Simultaneously, the very heart of the Ottoman military, the Janissaries, began to change. Once the elite slave soldiers of the Sultan, forged into the world's most disciplined fighting force, they had become a powerful political institution. They were no longer recruited solely through the Devivirum system, the levy of Christian boys. Instead, the corps was open to the sons of existing Janissaries and other freeborn Muslims. Their loyalty shifted from the Sultan to their own corps. They became kingmakers and kingbreakers. If a sultan tried to reform them or reduce their privileges, they would revolt, often deposing or even murdering him. They refused to adopt new military technologies and tactics, clinging to traditions that had made them powerful centuries before but were now becoming obsolete. Their focus turned from winning battles on the frontier to controlling politics in the capital. The empire's sword had become a double-edged blade, as dangerous to the sultan as it was to his enemies. And while these internal dramas played out in the candlelit rooms of the palace, the world outside was changing at a breathtaking pace. In Europe, the Renaissance had sparked a scientific revolution, and the age of discovery was redrawing the maps of the world. New sea routes to the east, bypassing the Ottoman-controlled land routes, began to divert the flow of trade and treasure. Spices and silk, which had once flowed through Ottoman markets, enriching the treasury, were now being carried on Portuguese and Dutch ships sailing around Africa. The influx of silver from the Americas also caused massive inflation, devaluing the Ottoman currency and destabilizing the economy. The empire, which had grown rich by being the world's great middleman, was slowly being economically sidelined. Its foundational economic model was becoming obsolete, and the leadership, consumed by internal power struggles, was too slow to adapt. The decline was not a sudden collapse, it was a slow, creeping sickness. It was the quiet conversation in a minister's office, trading a governorship for a bag of gold. It was the fearful glance of a prince in the caves, wondering if today was his last. It was the murmur of discontent from a janissary who cared more for his coffee shop business in Istanbul than for his duty on the battlefield. It was the weary sigh of a farmer in Anatolia, forced to give yet another share of his harvest to a corrupt tax collector. Each of these was a single, fragile thread snapping. For a long time, the tapestry held. The empire was still vast, its armies still formidable, its culture still vibrant. But one by one, the threads of strong leadership, military discipline, economic vitality, and administrative integrity were breaking. The magnificent fabric was growing weaker, more vulnerable, ready to tear under the pressures that the coming centuries would bring. The golden age was over, and a long, twilight struggle for survival had begun. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into the hidden corridors of history interesting, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this one. Your support means the world. See you next time. The endless wars have bled the empire dry. For generations, the trumpets have sounded, calling sons and fathers to fields far from home. Two conflicts that flicker and fade but never truly die. From the frostbitten plains of Europe to the sun-scorched sands of the Middle East, our armies march. They march under banners that were once vibrant with victory, now tattered and faded, heavy with the dust of forgotten campaigns. We were told these wars were necessary for security, for glory, for the very preservation of our way of life. But as years turned into decades, the promises of swift victory turned to whispers of stalemate. The cost has been immeasurable, not just in treasure, though the coffers are indeed empty, but in spirit. A weariness has settled over the land, a quiet melancholy that hangs in the air like the morning fog over a silent battlefield. We see it in the eyes of the veterans who return. Their gaze is distant, forever fixed on a horizon we cannot see. We hear it in the hushed conversations in taverns and marketplaces, a shared uncertainty about what the future holds. The grand narrative of our empire, once a triumphant epic, now feels like a somber duel. Our generals, once lauded as heroes, now seem trapped in the strategies of the past. They fight the last war, again and again, sending fresh waves of young soldiers against old, intractable problems. The military machine, once the pride of the empire, has become a lumbering beast, slow to adapt, consuming vast resources for minimal gain. Innovation has given way to repetition. Boldness has been replaced by a grim, stubborn refusal to admit defeat, even as the very definition of victory becomes hopelessly blurred. The maps in the great halls of the capital tell the story. Territories that were once shaded in our color are now gone, lost not always to decisive battles, but to a slew. Relentless erosion, a distant province rebels, and we lack the will or the men to bring it back into the fold. A border skirmish escalates, and a treaty is signed that cedes land our ancestors fought to secure. Each loss is a paper cut, small and insignificant on its own, but together, they have left the empire bleeding, weakened from 1,000 small wounds. We have become masters of tactical withdrawal, of strategic repositioning, of finding grand terms for simple retreat. And what of the people? The human cost is the ledger that is never fully Every soldier lost is a family shattered, a future extinguished. Villages have been hollowed out, their young men gone, leaving only the old and the very young to tend the fields and keep the home fires burning. The stories that come back from the front are not tales of heroic charges, but of long, terrifying nights, of the gnawing anxiety of waiting, of the sudden, brutal violence that tears friendships and lives apart in an instant. The physical scars may heal, but the unseen wounds, the ones carried in the mind and the soul, fester for a lifetime. Think of the resources. The iron that could have forged plowshares was hammered into swords. The grain that could have fed the hungry was diverted to provision armies in lands no one can find on a map. The minds that could have built universities, cured diseases, or composed symphonies were instead put to the task of designing more efficient siege engines and deadlier arrowheads. We have mortgaged our future for the sake of a perpetual present of conflict. The empire's creative and productive energies have been siphoned away, leaving a void where progress and prosperity should have grown. The world outside our borders no longer looks at us with awe or fear, but with a mixture of pity and opportunism. Our rivals, seeing our entanglement, grow bolder. Our allies, weary of our endless calls for aid, grow distant. We are an empire adrift, our moral compass spinning wildly. The virtues we claim to be defending, justice, order, peace, have become hollow justifications for our own exhaustion. We fight because we have forgotten how to stop. The war has become its own reason for being, a self-perpetuating cycle of violence and revenge. The fog of war is not just something that hangs over the battlefield. It has seeped into our hearts and minds. We no longer see clearly. The grand purpose has been lost, replaced by the simple, grim necessity of survival. But what are we surviving for? To fight another day? To send another generation into the meat grinder? These are the questions we must now ask ourselves. In the quiet twilight of our imperial age, the banners may still fly, But the wind that fills them is a lament. It whispers of what was, and what could have been, had we chosen the path of peace over the long, sorrowful road of war. It is time to look inward, to count the true cost, not in gold or territory, but in the very soul of our people. The path forward is not on some distant battlefield. It is here, at home, in the difficult work of rebuilding, of healing, of rediscovering the purpose we lost somewhere in the smoke and the chaos. The greatest battle we now face is not against a foreign enemy, but against our own inertia, our own history. It is a battle for the future, a battle for the soul of the empire itself, and it is a battle we can no longer afford to lose. The quiet fields and the silent cities are waiting. They are waiting for the soldiers to come home, not as conquerors, but as builders. They are waiting for the trumpets of war to be melted down, and their metal used to forge a new era of peace. Thank you for watching.